This book by Alan Watson. In there, he makes the argument that if a divinity existed, it would get bored. If it just it knows what's happening, even after it had all its experiences, there'd be like, this is no fun. So it would have to forget that it was having the experiences. It would have to forget and then remember potentially its experience. And yeah, that does seem like what a divinity would do. More plausible that somehow we're all tapping into the same consciousness, but through our own eyes, playing essentially hide and seek with ourselves. And in the process, learning new things because we're actually gaining further understanding. Like, try to imagine a divinity who knows absolutely everything. There's nothing left to learn. Like, that would be terrible. So that experience led me to be just really interested in the possibility that consciousness might expand in ways that we don't currently recognize in the current, very strongly material reductionist view, which says that all you are is a pack of neurons, just a pack of molecules, pack of atoms, and so on. It just invited me to think bigger. I'd have to say there was a confluence of influences, and it's important to emphasize that everyone in my family for generations were psychological or are psychological sciences. So my mother, my father, my brother, my son, great uncle. I have a first or second cousin. So it's kind of been the family business to explore the mind. But the particular sort of flavor that I found myself moving towards definitely was inspired in part by this experience of reading Alan Watts when I was 14. And I highly recommend this book. It's called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And in that book, he invites us to entertain. And by the way, I have a motto, which is entertaining without endorsing. So like all the ideas I'll talk about today, I think they are worthy of entertaining. I'm not sure that I that necessarily endorse any of them, but I definitely think they're worthy of entertaining. And I invite your listeners to try them on for themselves and just play with, well, what if that idea were true? Or can I imagine that idea being true? Anyhow, back to the story. So I get this book by Alan Watson. In there, he makes the argument that if a divinity exists, and it doesn't have to be like the standard old guy one or the guy who died on a cross or any of that. Just imagine some sort of knowing intelligence existed, uh, and it would get bored, right? If it just kept like it knew it knows what's happening. It's and so then it would even after it had all its experiences, there'd be like, this is no fun. So it would have to forget that it was having the experiences. It would have to forget and then remember potentially its experience. And so he makes this point that that if there were a divinity, the divinity would not know that it was, would try not, at least for a period of time, try not to know that it was that, because that would keep it interesting. And that just really landed with me as, yeah, that does seem like what a divinity would do. More plausible that somehow we're all tapping into the same consciousness, but through our own eyes, playing essentially hide and seek with ourselves. And in the process, learning new things because we're actually gaining further understanding. This is the other thing. Like, try to imagine a divinity who knows absolutely everything. There's nothing left to learn. Like, it would be, for me personally, that would be terrible. Just the lack of unfolding knowledge, so it's really, thank goodness, we didn't wake up and experience that's what it is. At least you wouldn't want to hold that for very long. So that experience led me to be just really interested in the nature of consciousness and just really thinking about consciousness and the possibility that consciousness might expand in ways that we don't currently recognize in the current very strongly material reductionist view, which says that all you are is a pack of neurons, and all they are is just a pack of molecules, and all those are is a pack of atoms, and so on. It just invited me to think bigger. But also, I recognize, you can't start graduate school, making, and I'm still not making the claim, I'm just inviting the invitation, even discussing the possibility that we're all divinity playing hide and seek with itself. It's just not, uh, I mean, maybe you could if you went into theology or philosophy, but since I was destined for psychology, I took that route. And so basically my goal was to explore consciousness in very rigorous ways but always sort of pushing the envelope towards bigger picture questions. And that's where we find ourselves today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me of what someone else said that being in heaven or being God is really boring, right? Because you know everything and you know everything it's going to happen. And why would you be there if you know everything's going to happen the way it's going to happen? So, and it speaks to what you're saying, entertaining without endorsing, which is that ontological humility that I feel like a lot more people need nowadays because, everyone can be a little bit right and everyone definitely can be wrong. But I would love to explore a little bit deeper on this exploration with you on helping the audience understand, Jonathan, what is the difference between consciousness as a definition and intelligence? Because you make clear distinctions with that. And especially with, artificial intelligence nowadays, a lot of people get confused. So can you help us understand there?
Yeah, Jason, that's a really important question. It's a very, very timely question, and it's a question again where I think some ontological humility is warranted. What I think is clear is that they are not the same thing by any means. I mean, if you just imagine just within the scope of humans, you take a really intelligent human and a less intelligent human. I don't think there's any difference in their degree of consciousness. Like pain hurts a less intelligent human exactly as much, or maybe more, than an intelligent one. And I honestly think that just keeps going down. I don't see any reason not to think very plausible that dogs it hurts. Pain hurts a dog just as much it hurts us. And I think it's even possible that a fish, I'm sorry, fishermen, but I think fish, may really suffer, and that anything that's conscious is capable of having intense feelings. Now, there are going to be certain things that are going to be different, right? Um, a fish is not going to experience existential angst probably with much regularity about the fact that it will inevitably die. It might experience a little intellectual angst, as the shark is coming after it, but in the meantime, it probably doesn't think about that the way we do. So there certainly are fundamental ways in which consciousness changes as we with intelligence, but the essence, where the definition of consciousness is having an experience, that there's something to like to be that being. I think there's a kind of universal to that, and this also fits with the possibility, that divinity is playing hide and seek with itself, not just by being you and me, but by being that fish and that plant and all those different things. There may be a inner life to all things. I think it's really plausible. Now, bringing this back to AI, Russian dolls, right? So where you have the doll with the doll with inside the doll. From the outside, a Russian doll that has got, countless smaller dolls inside it looks exactly the same as a Russian doll that's completely empty inside. And that could be what's going on between, in fact, personally, I think likely, at least for the moment, the difference between us and an AI. The AI is just got the outer thing, but there's no insight. There's no of these nested windows, which we can hopefully get to later on. And so it isn't actually having an inner experience. It's just acting as if it has an inner experience. And of course, the risk here is that people are going to start in this. I mean, if we can as kids, we impose consciousness onto our toy dolls. And even though I'm open to the idea of inanimate things having some level of consciousness, I think it's at a very small level, maybe the particle level or something like that. I don't think it's just very implausible to me that the doll itself has any consciousness. Although, I wouldn't, I don't want to rule it out entirely necessarily. But the point is that if we can imagine consciousness for inanimate things, then how easy is it going to be for us to imagine that these incredibly intelligent AIs are conscious? And then that brings up all sorts of things like the uh, having to be concerned about the rights of AIs, giving them time off and allowing them to vote. I mean, it's just, or and then people like going, I'm going to download because you could probably emulate people. They think they're downloading themselves into an AI, which is essentially emulating them, but there's no there. There's no consciousness there. So, according to some visions, we could be sort of evolve into a new species, this sort of AI species, which just doesn't happen to have any consciousness, and it would be the end of consciousness itself.
Yeah, that sounds like straight out of a movie there, Jonathan. So, very interesting ideas to think about for sure. And I would love to get into your theory, which is the nested observer window. And but before we do that, can you help the audience, because I think this is important because you talk about that. There's a difference between awareness and meta awareness, which leads into your nested observer window theory. So, can you kind of guide through us
Yeah.
that?
So this is a distinction that I've been talking about for a while, and the place where I find it the easiest to really ground myself in it. And I have to admit, even though I'm kind of one of the major figures coining this idea, I get confused sometimes about was this consciousness, was this meta awareness, and so on. So it's a little bit slippery, but there are certain cases which are very clear. So I think probably everybody has had who reads well at least has had the experience of reading along and suddenly realizing that their eyes have been moving across the page, but their mind has been thinking about something completely elsewhere. Have you had that experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the
And
time.
it's for many of us, it's pretty regular. And oftentimes there's kind of a sheepish smile that people show when I say this, because it's like, yes, welcome to my world. This happens to me, constantly. Think about what's happening when you do that, when you're mind wandering while simultaneously reading. Now, that you don't just do this with stuff you don't care about. Routinely, at least I do, mind wander about things that are important that I need to pay attention to. So, had I realized that I was mind wandering, I would have stopped reading or stopped mind wandering. I know that I can't do both simultaneously, and yet I do. And there's this moment where I go, oh, geez, I was mind wandering. I wasn't reading, even though I thought I was reading because I've been sitting there holding the book, moving my eyes across the page. So that moment of realization that you were mind wandering instead of reading, that's a moment of meta awareness. That's where you take the lens of consciousness and you turn it on itself and you go, what's going on in my mind right now? And you realize, oh, I was mind wandering. And it's not just mind wandering. You can be angry and not notice that you're angry. In fact, you can be so angry that even when asked, you shout, I'm not angry, because you haven't really turned the lens of meta awareness onto yourself. All sorts of experiences when you're driving and suddenly you realize that you've driven two exits past where you wanted to get off, where you're scratching an itch and that you've told yourself you're not supposed to be scratching, you're enjoying it. Oh, so all these things where we lack meta awareness. And so, what this leads me to think is that it's not that meta awareness is a different kind of consciousness, it's a very important topic of consciousness. It's when consciousness is thinking about itself. And I suspect that this is a kind of consciousness that may be more prevalent with more intelligent species and perhaps even more intelligent people.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, Buddhism and with mindfulness, right? Which is the whole idea is not to be attached to your thoughts or emotions, but to take a step back and to see it for the bigger picture there. And I've definitely had my own experiences, Jonathan, where I had that question: what does it feel like to be a rock? What does it feel like to be a cell in my body? And I've had certain meditation experiences, not intentionally, but just practicing mindfulness and just being aware of my thoughts, that I suddenly had the feeling of what it was like to be a cell in my body, which is very
Mm,
strange. It was like very dark. I felt very isolated. It was very numb. There wasn't that scale of higher order thinking, but it was very real to me, at least in terms of my nature of that experience of self. And time was actually very strange as well, which leads me to my next question, because you do talk about, the different aspects of time in the nested observer window theory. So can we sort of help me explain what I went through your theory there? And I know you have a lot of amazing metaphors in describing this theory of yours.
Thank you. We actually have two different theories, Justin Riddle and myself, um, that interface, but it's and both of them are quite provocative in certain ways. But it's possible that the uh, three dimensions of time model might be right and the nested observer window wrong, or some part of the three dimensions of time right, and so each one has its own sort of independence, and even the assumptions within each one of those two varies to some degree. But what I would say first off is my intuition is that a cell is actually feeling, in many cases, a sense of community, right? It's like nudging up and interacting with other cells, and they're connected and communicating. There's this whole, quite a life of cells. And I mean, if you were a single cell in a petri dish, I think you would. I think it would be very lonely. I think, although maybe you'd be like, "Whoa, all this agar, this is, you know, this is awesome." But anyhow, let's start with thinking about the nested observer window model, and then we'll come to time. So, the nested observer window model, the basic metaphor is that of a mosaic photograph. And so a mosaic photograph is where every pixel of the photograph is itself a photograph. And then you can imagine every pixel of that lower level photograph being a photograph, and so on. And the idea is that every one of those pixel slash photographs could be a seat of experience. So in addition to the apex, so what you call you is actually the apex window that's then integrating lower level windows, and those are integrating lower level windows, and the apex is able to turn and sort of focus on the experience of certain lower level windows or other lower level windows. And to give you sort of an example of a lower level window, I think the tongue is a really good example, because the sort of the tongue brain circuit. So the tongue, it operates really well on its own, right? It's able to, like, it's cleaning your teeth, it's dodging your teeth, it's helping you talk, it's tasting, it's doing all this stuff, and it can do that all completely without you thinking, oh, my tongue's doing this, do that, do that. But you can also, stick out your tongue, and you can experience your tongue. You can focus on your tongue. And then the tongue, of course, has a bunch of taste buds, which are like the lower level windows. And then those taste buds, connect to lower level things as well. So the idea is that it's possible that there's something it's like to be your tongue, that the tongue has sort of its own experience. And sometimes you're attending to that experience, and sometimes you're directing your apex otherwards. But you can sometimes access the experience of your tongue. But then the lower level windows become increasingly, you don't experience them at all. So when you get down to like a single cell, you're experiencing the uh, condensation of that experience of the cell, which got combined into a higher level and higher level. So it is actually potentially influencing your experience in just the most minute way, but it's really being integrated into this higher level windows upon windows upon windows. So that's the cell part, and sort of the nested observer, first pass of the nested observer window model part. And we speculate there's various different resonance is sort of the key way in which windows communicate with each other. We could go into that if you want to. But then the idea is that all of these windows of consciousness are moving through time, and that what consciousness is the experience of moving through subjective time. And should I just keep going, or do you want to like get a clarity on nested observer windows? Keep
Well,
going.
yeah. Let's
It's a
finish up
monologue.
with the time piece, and I'll
Yeah.
have some follow up questions there.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Okay. So the idea is that all the windows are moving through time, but that there are actually three dimensions of time. Okay. And so what I want to encourage your listeners to do is to visualize this thing. And I invite people to try it out. Maybe try two dimensions, maybe try four, maybe label the axes differently. This is just a toy model to play with, but I think it provides a a grounding for really making these abstract theories more concrete. Okay, so here we go. We're going to build the model in your mind. Okay, so the first thing is we've got objective time, and objective time is forward. Okay, so that's just imagining the window going forward like that. And then you've got subjective time, and subjective time is up. Okay, and so the window is always moving in objective and potentially subjective time. If the window is completely um, vertical, so its vector is exclusively in objective time, then it's like you're under anesthesia. You're not experiencing any passage of time whatsoever. As soon as it tilts, then you'll experience it again. If it were pointing straight up, then and just going straight up, then your vector is exclusively in subjective time, and it'd be like time stops, as if you're like looking at the clock and it's not moving anywhere. If it's pointing, sort of mostly up, then it's going to be like in a car accident where time seems to slow down. And if it's pointing mostly forward, moving mostly forward, so it's going in objective time, sort of greater level of objective versus subjective, it's like you're in a deep conversation. So maybe if you're really absorbed and you're taking these big ideas, you're sort of moving like that. And you can also sort of think of this as the number of objective moments per subjective moments, which could also be likened to like the frame rate of a camera. So really fast frame rate is like going more up, more subjective moments per objective moment. Slower is going more towards the objective, uh, more more subjective, uh, where you're having this experience of um, every block of time, uh, a single moment incorporating more information and a larger extent of time. So the idea then is that the cell and smaller animals like a fly, they have a greater vector in subjective time relative to objective time. So their frame rate is very fast. And this may be why it's so hard to swat a fly, because it seems to them like you're moving in slow motion. The passage of time for them is different. And I suspect the passage of time for a cell may be different if it has an experience of it. And so like this is also interesting because it suggests like there's something like I think it's called like a day fly or something like that. It just lasts one day, but it's possible that all different creatures experience lifetimes as taking the same amount of subjective time. It's just that how long a moment lasts for them is different. And so even though your cells are not living as long as you are, it might feel like a lifetime for a cell because of its relative vector and objective versus subjective time. Okay, I have two more moves here. The third dimension is alternative time, and that's left right. And that's where free will comes in. That's where the idea is that every window has a little bit of wiggle room to choose paths that are associated with its imperatives. And we can talk about what the possible imperatives of these windows are. And then the final move is that rather than us moving through time, time is moving through us. And you can imagine all these different windows all sort of tethered together with time moving through it, kind of like the wind is blowing past a kite with lots of different sails. And in this view, we're all tethered together, not even just ourselves, but each one of us is tethered together in this giant kite of consciousness, which is moving through time, or in fact, time is moving through the kite of consciousness. There you go.
Yeah, well, thank you for those visuals because I think without it, it would be challenging to digest what you're saying. But I think despite that, Jonathan, I think you make it very simple to understand because I always try to again ground a lot of these ideas that these ancient civilizations, contemplative practices, Buddhism, Hinduism, they talk about this idea of we're spiritual beings living this human experience, which is another way to talk about, consciousness, like you said, time subjectively being in this human body is relative. And they say that for sort of for souls, right? One lifetime could be, like 5 minutes, relatively speaking. But what does that mean relative to us and how it is up there? And it speaks to, going back to your nested observer window theory, these pixels, right, in this mosaic. The way that I was taught in sort of my spiritual practice is that this higher consciousness pours a portion of itself, like water, like a pitcher of water, into a glass of water. And now we are just this glass of water, and the water is our consciousness, and the glass is our body. But and we go through life, and then when we return back after death, that water goes back into the pitcher, and then you realize, oh, I was actually part of this larger scale of things, which sounds like, again, with your nested observer window theory there, in terms of how there are different levels to understanding our experience there. Have you, I guess, because a lot of people would speak to you on these types of topics, whether it's theology or theosophy, have other people commented their sort of, I guess, spiritual lens on the now theory there?
Yeah, well, the now theory does lend itself to entertaining uh, the possibility of higher levels of consciousness because maybe we're not the apex. Maybe we are all a pixel for a higher level window. But that window shouldn't get too full of itself either because it could be a pixel for yet a higher level window. So it simultaneously builds in the possibility of higher levels of consciousness and also a, a humility in sort of recognizing you never know when you are the top window. I do have an intuition, though. I will say, I feel like there is a top and a bottom just because my brain can't deal with the notion of infinitely large windows. And I kind of feel like what's really going on is that it's kind of going up and down and up and down and up and down. So it lends itself also to that sort of vision. But it also lends itself with the subjective time that we're basically that there's a sort of subjective time is the experience is the ocean is the water, and each one of the windows is just sort of filtering that moving through the water moving through it. So it very much is analogous to the picture vision that you were providing before. I would say though that you could, if you take sort of the water analogy, you could also imagine each one of us, and people say don't mix your metaphors, and that's just I can't help but do that. But I think that's okay because I think every metaphor is imperfect, and so each metaphor is helpful in some ways, but then other metaphors are helpful for other things. And so another thing you can sort of think about is as whirlpools, right? And so it's possible that even after we die, uh, the sort of whirlpool of consciousness that that emerged through our lifetime continues. And so we may just the whirlpool stops and we just blend into the entire ocean of shared consciousness, or it could be that there's the continued whirlpool, and this could be in in Buddhist theories, so the idea that you reincarnate a number of times, but then eventually you don't reincarnate anymore because essentially you've realized how to stop the endless what they call cycle of death and rebirth.
Yeah, and it speaks to that third aspect of alternate time, right? And you bring up the imperative of free will, which a lot of scientists debate as well. In addition to the hard problem of consciousness. So, what is your take on free will then in this aspect? Because you mentioned about sort of that wiggle room between the windows there.
Yeah. So the two things. One is my own view, and then the other is how it plays out in the theory. I recognize there are three basic ways of thinking, three basic schools of thought with respect to free will. There's hard determinism, which basically says um, that everything is causal. Nothing is an uncaused cause. So everything you do is the product of the causal processes that led up to it, much like the domino, where the domino falls because of all the ones that came to it. And maybe it could fall this way or that way, but that's random. So it's either causal or random. And with causal and random, there's no place for free will. And it's a very compelling argument. And it's the one that um, many mainstream scientists hold. On the other hand, is the libertarian view, which says, no, I get it that everything is causal, but consciousness is different. consciousness actually is able to control and behaves in a way that's different from all of the things that we know about or we think we know about. And that's the kind of model that most of us, when we talk about free will, really are sort of espousing, that we feel like we have something like a soul, and that soul is able to actually decide to be a cause unto itself, to go this way or that way. And even though it's considering the options that came, it's actually contributing to which way it goes. And then the third one is kind of the have your cake and eat it too, which is that, yes, it's true, everything is deterministic, but consciousness nevertheless is faced with making real decisions, and those real decisions matter. And so it's deterministic, but they still have free will in this delimited sense of consciousness doing things that are important. And I find myself like on a Monday, I'll feel like, God, there's just no getting over determinism. And on a Tuesday, it's like, but compatibilism is that would be the best because you have your cake and eat it too. And then on Wednesday, it's like, but those just don't work. I don't see how you can, compatibilism doesn't really make sense logically speaking. It sounds good, but when you really think about it hard, it just doesn't work. When I really sink into my core, I feel like, my consciousness is really steering in some delimited way. And I like the metaphor of a sailboat, right? If you're sailing a sailboat without a motor, you can't control the waves, you can't control the wind. All you can do is set your sail and move your rudder. And there may be a storm, you may end up very far from where you want to go, but yet you do have some control. And oftentimes, if you're a good sailor, you'll end up where you want to be. So I find all three of those different visions compelling. I will say I probably wake up on more days as a libertarian, but I totally see the argument for all three different views. They're all compelling in their own ways. But in the three dimensions of time model, the idea is that every window is through its experience, that consciousness is actually the secret to why it's able to steer. And we don't understand consciousness. So the hard problem of consciousness, I think, is intimately tied up with the hard problem of free will. And because we so don't understand consciousness, we don't know how this 3-pound meatloaf of a brain creates the full realm of experience. We don't know. We don't even really understand causation. So that creates this humility for us, which opens the door for the possibility that maybe consciousness is controlling in a certain way each one of those individual windows. And those windows have imperatives, potentially imperatives for survival, for pleasure over pain, and I think for information compression. Like the feeling of curiosity is like the key thing, and you see it in animals, and everything seems to have this curious thing. So I think each one of these things is moving towards the informationally rich possibility, and this is how, even in a realm where entropy is increasing, we also get this continual increase in complexification, which doesn't get talked about enough. There's almost this anti-entropy, which is, and it's especially seems to be associated with life, um, really has this complexification, this increasing extraction of information, and we seem to have evolved towards greater and greater capacity for this. And this could reflect the imperative of all the windows towards the informationally rich, complex, but but structured aspects of existence.
Yeah, which reminds me, because a lot of people say online that the universe is expanding, right, and that we as humans or souls are here to evolve or to learn and to grow. And I was just speaking to Dr. James Gladfelder, who's a physicist turned philosopher, and he talks about the sapient cosmos, and he talks about what you're talking about. There's this complexity in the universe, but despite all the craziness and the chaos, there seems to be some maybe algorithm or something that is driving this very neat, intelligent way of organizing things. From down to the cell. When you look at the organelles to looking at our galaxy, right there, it's just crazy to think that this could have happened by random, right, it could have be, but it seems to be a very similar theme there.
Yeah, I actually I very much admire. I haven't read his book, but I listened to his Essentia podcast, which I highly recommend. And I really resonated with a lot of what he said. Although there is one place where I strongly entertain a difference. And that is that he calls it the sapient universe because he's distinguishing between intelligence and consciousness, which, as I said, I recognize as well. But I think that a lot of what drives the imperatives of these windows to go into towards complexity as opposed to towards just entropy is consciousness. So I feel like he's uh, sweeping consciousness under the rug a little bit, at least the way that I was hearing him. Whereas I think that there may be a more intimate relationship um, uh, with intelligence and consciousness in the sense that things that are conscious have a certain kind of very basic intelligence. They have this the assumption is this uh, ability to recognize imperatives and somehow to with the pleasure more than or approach or avoiding pain, information extraction, and in a certain sense survival. But I think it's really intriguing to sort of think about these questions and to keep both on the table. And indeed, in our nested observer window model, we point out that you could have consciousness going all the way down to the lowest level windows, or you could imagine that there's some phase, some time at which consciousness emerges at some level in the system of windows where they go from being sapient to being uh, sentient. And then it could be, I still entertain the possibility that this whole idea that consciousness goes down to lower level systems is no more accurate than thinking that ChatGPT is conscious and that really consciousness is only at the apex. So his theory is very interesting and it relates to mine and Justin's in many significant ways, but at the same time, there are some differences. I'd also want to do a shout out, incidentally, to Tam Hunt. We have a related theory called general resonance theory, which has a lot more very sort of specifications to it and also connects to electromagnetic fields. And again, I think it's okay to have multiple theories that are even sort of competing with each other in a little way that have different assumptions. And in almost every paper I've done with Tam, we have footnotes where we say, Schooler agrees with this. He's not so sure about that. Tam is one of these full-on he is a endorser in a way that it just doesn't fit my style. But I just want to shout out that I think it's really valuable to look at all sorts of different theories, and the one that you mentioned is an especially compelling one.
Yeah, and it's always interesting, Jonathan, because when I interview, amazingly brilliant scientists like yourself or James or even Michael Levin, right? Which he talks about uh, the ways that from evolutionary biology and what things can be categorized as conscious, right? In some of these organisms that are so simple that you would not even think that they could be quote unquote conscious, but they have this goal oriented agency that you talk about, which is to survive, to reproduce, evolve. And it seems to have goes beyond it, where he has, I think, certain organisms that has this memory, right, where you cut off the head and it kind of regrows back, and all that crazy stuff, which points to okay, maybe where's this information coming from if it's not just from the genes in the brain there, and his bioelectric fields is very interesting for me as well. Because how I got into this is I'm a energy healer, and I'm an
Hmm.
acupuncturist, so I know about the body's meridians and energy fields, and what he talks about with cancer is very interesting for me too. Is what you're saying? There's this community, right? And these cancer cells appear to have lost communication with the local community of tissues, and they suddenly become rogue, and they forget. And by restoring these bioelectrical fields, it sort of reestablishes this communication, and the cell returns and the tissue normalizes. I'm just generalizing it. Any comments there? Because you speak of
Oh, well, I mean,
Hunt.
I just have such incredible admiration for Michael. I think his work is I mean, I would love to think of myself on the same level as his, but honestly, he's taken things to a whole nother level in terms of producing a theory that not only speaks to these, sort of fundamental metaphysical questions about where how far down does consciousness go, but he's also like able to sort of show experimentally evidence that's consistent with some of his views in terms of the way that cells reproduce themselves following this remarkable memory of sort of the imperatives that they seem to have. And the fact that he can then further take this and apply it to the potential ways of thinking about major issues like curing cancer or addressing cancer. It's just stunning the way. So I would definitely recommend your viewers to listen to his talks. It's just really outstanding. That said, also consistent with the nested observer window model, and the idea that basically these when he's creating these little hybrid creatures, there he's the individual bits are connecting into larger windows, and that structure of windows upon windows, uh, and with some sort of sentience to lower level windows becomes more plausible. I mean, if you're willing to imagine his little creatures having consciousness, or an organoid, which Christoph Koch talks about having consciousness, then it seems more plausible to imagine that my kidney is conscious, or these my heart, and which is, feels, you can imagine there's a consciousness to it. So all that data does help to fit into the nested observer window model, although uh, we have not created predictions that are, could cure cancer the way he has.
Yeah, but it speaks to your theory with the nested observer window. I know you've mentioned that it's not just a theory, that this is testable as well. It's not just something abstract, that there are domains where you can explore and sort of prove what you're saying here. Is that
Well,
correct?
I'm Mr. Entertaining without endorsing. So, prove is a tough word for me personally, but let me make a few comments about that. Um, there are definitely a variety of lines of research that could be done um, that would speak to some of the uh, conjectures of the nested observer window model in terms of, uh, for example, just at the high level, one thing that we're interested in is can you can you get consciousnesses sort of separate? And one example of that is, and maybe some of your viewers are familiar with this, tulpas, which are this we create especially essentially an imaginary friend, and at some point the imaginary friend seems to wake up and take on an independent stream of consciousness. And if that's the case, then once people have a tulpa, they should be able to do what's known as dichotic listening, where they're hearing one message in one ear and a different message in the other ear. And the tulpa mancer tends to one ear and the tulpa tends to the other. And they should be able to process the two messages simultaneously in a way that when we are just at our apex are unable to do. And there are all sorts of other assumptions about the relationship between the vibrations of different levels and the way in which the communication information passes. And then with respect to the three dimensions of time, I think it's possible that there could be ways of taking just what we know about experience and about uh, models of physics and recast them in terms of the three dimensions of time. So there may be ways to create a computationally viable characterization of uh, these all these windows of time moving through all these windows. With keep in mind, each one of the individual windows is having a different angle and objective and subjective and alternative time. And it may be that quantum effects happen as a result of these changes in the angles. And so I think it's possible that someone smarter than me would be able to figure out how to operationalize this model within the framework of existing data. And importantly, the three dimensions of time model accommodates key things that are missing from mainstream physics models, including uh, the experience of consciousness itself, the flow of time, the privileged present, and free will. So if you could build a model which computationally managed all the data that was there, it would have the advantage that it incorporates these fundamental aspects of lived experience, whereas the others have to sweep them under the rug. Now, if you did that, though, it's still not clear that you could necessarily prove that this model is more viable than many of the other models. So, in the same way that string theory exists, but some people call it philosophy because they haven't been able to prove that it works, or the many worlds theory in physics, or the Copen, there are all these different sort of accounts, and no one has been able to prove one or the other. But just as the fact that they can at least characterize, they provide a lens that is logically coherent is an accomplishment in and of itself. And I suspect, and this, like in my most optimistic of possible imaginations, that modifications of this model could be um, generated that would be consistent with the known data, but that it could then be shown to be um, empirically superior. I'm not sure, but the key thing is that it would be experientially superior because the current models have no place, as I said, for these fundamental aspects of lived experience.
Yeah, those fundamental aspects where that experience itself exists, and experience has a certain flow, right? A succession. Experience is always now in the present moment, which all these contemplative spiritual practices talk about, and experience is also influenced by our decisions, right? Our free will,
Exactly.
in the way you describe it there. And it's funny because as you talk about this model, I know you've mentioned like the theories of consciousness. It's like toothbrushes, right? Everyone doesn't, there's so many out there, and no, you just like the one that you use, right? And it's fascinating because I think there's over 350 different theories of consciousness, or something like that. So it speaks to the profound nature of our reality, and how that question is continues to evolve. And I'm sure with your theory, there are major stepping points we can build upon with the rest there. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that the other metaphor that comes to mind with the toothbrushes and the theories is the elephant, the blind men touching the elephant. And I think the 350 theories of consciousness are basically each person touching the elephant in a different place, looking at somewhat different questions. And maybe because they're just in that one place and not really willing to try on all the other ones, recognizing that they can be integrated. And indeed, in our nested observer window paper, we talk about how many of the other theories could be integrated into the nested observer theory, and in that sense, it's a bit of a meta theory. Um, but I think I'm not discouraged by the fact that there are 350 theories. I think that what that shows is that people are thinking about this now, and they weren't. When I started in this field we organized a meeting in 1993 with Jonathan Cohen on consciousness before the famous Tucson meeting. And at that time, consciousness was practically a taboo word to talk about scientifically. So the fact now, not all of the 350 theories uh, that have been outlined are necessarily scientific, but many of them are, or at least connects to the scientific findings. So I think this is really an important step in our exploration of consciousness. And I hope that we don't settle on a single theory. I mean, even though, I mean, obviously, the, from a personal ego perspective, if everyone was, yeah, Schooler Riddle's now theory is, that's the one. But I hope that shouldn't happen. We're not ready for that. We need to just keep all these theories in the mix, thinking about how they relate to each other, feeling the elephant from different sides, and seeing where we end up.
And speaking of feeling the elephant from different sides, Jonathan, has there been any experience for you, whether it's a meditation, psychedelic, any experience that made you make made you feel like, wow, this is the elephant's trunk right here. I'm grabbing a part of something that I know that this is really convincing. Has Do you have any experiences to share with
All
us?
right, all right. So I do. I'll fess up. This is the first time I've ever mentioned this experience publicly, but I'll go for it. Uh, yeah, I mean, when people hear the theory, they go, "This guy must have done psychedelics, right?" And I have acknowledged doing psychedelics before. So, when I was in college, I was using psychedelics, and I was in a one of those easy chairs, the big. I don't. I guess they still have them. The big lazy boy easy chair. And I'm thinking to myself, God, what a great concept. Too bad he doesn't exist. In with like sort of sophomoric arrogance of like, of course any, intelligent person, knows that. And then I fell back in my chair. So I'm now staring straight up at the light, and my head resonates with, "Are you sure?" And in that moment, I was like, first off, was like, am I sure? I didn't hadn't occurred to me before that to say that God doesn't exist is just as much a statement of faith as to say that he does. And especially if you redefine God as some sort of intelligence greater than ourselves. So let's abandon all the baggage of the Judeo-Christian God and just think, is there some sort of intelligence to the universe that made it as remarkable as it is or not? And at the time, I thought there are two options here. Either there's some kind of intelligence, or we are incredibly lucky that of all the possible ways that things happen, they happened this way. And they're both like ridiculous. They're both outlandish. They're both incredible leaps of faith. It turns out that there's another one, of course, now, which is the many worlds, which is that if you have enough different worlds, enough different universes, eventually one of them is going to have exactly the right properties for consciousness to exist. But that's also crazy. In order to have this work, you have to have like a near infinite number of alternative universes with different characteristics. So it's choose your poison. Intelligence exists, incredibly lucky, or incredible number of universes for which there is absolutely no evidence other than the fact that it's so weird that everything has lined up in this one. And that realization that I was that I had just had the arrogance to think that believing in some sort of intelligence was a statement of faith, and not believing was just the sort of the facts of the matter. That was a shift that I think you can see carries on to this day. I'm still entertaining all three possibilities. I think they all are deserving of entertaining, but I don't think what's deserving is to say this is the only one deserving of entertaining. The material reductionist one, the one that says that there is no intelligence. If you think anything else, you're not scientific, you're superstitious, you haven't, read enough. I don't think that's defensible personally, although I have many friends who hold that view, and I respect them.
Yeah, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. That's a treat for our audience. And yeah, reality is a stranger than fiction. And I think that, speaking of this ontological humility that we've been, talking about, I think it's, whether it's people like you or other, scientists, physicists that I speak to, they speak of the same message, right? Is to entertain without endorse, right? To be open and curious, and to continue to explore, but never hold or attach oneself to just one idea of the world, that it could be. And, to share your experience, I've been there too. I've had my experiences like, okay, this is the only way that the universe can exist, and this is why I'm here. And then, life and the universe, synchronicity, God finds a way of giving me a slap on the head and like, take a look down that end of the road. I'm like, oh wow, I didn't notice that. Thank you. So thank you for sharing that experience. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. And speaking of a lot of people, if they would like to reach out to you, Jonathan, and connect to more of your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, so if you just Google MetaLab UCSB, you'll find my website and lots of links to all of our papers and many interviews, podcasts, that type of thing. They can also find me there and reach out to me personally. And yeah, I think that I would encourage them and commend them if they're listening to this for being in a state of exploration and openness. And I'll just make a quick pitch that right now we are imagining that openness may be the new mindfulness, that in the same way that you can cultivate a capacity for being grounded in the present, you can cultivate a capacity for being open to new experiences, to new ideas, to intellectual humility, ontological humility, to, to fundamentally ground yourself in curiosity, which I think may be the imperative of everything. And that in doing so, in creating states of curiosity and engaging in not just mind wandering, which is what I've studied a lot, but mind wondering, where you're playfully exploring ideas. I feel like that is a really exciting direction for humanity. And that if people were to become more open, because openness is associated with creativity and curiosity, intellectual humility, conceptual expansiveness, concern for the future of humanity, concern for the environment, appreciation of the arts. If people could cultivate that quality in the same way that some people cultivate mindfulness, or maybe even more, that could really shift enough sails of the kite of consciousness to get us going in a really productive direction.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the big 5, right? Or the
That's right.
of
Openness is one of the big five personality traits. It's one of the major dimensions on which people differ. And interestingly, people who are high in openness also live longer. It's kind of like being young at heart. So I guess much of your audience isn't concerned about that now, but they also can lose openness as people get older. What oftentimes happens is they get set in their ways, and so keeping that openness alive, keeping wonder alive, childlike wonder is just it's kind of like the fountain of youth, and I think it keeps life interesting and really makes more meaning.
Yeah, yeah, that openness and that psychological flexibility, which I know that it helps people even with depression or anxiety too, to kind of rebound too, if you're not in that canalized, stuck state. So, so thank you for sharing that, Jonathan, and it was a pleasure to use your toothbrush of consciousness today, and I'm sure a lot of our audience wouldn't have minded too. But yeah, it again speaks to the theme that this curiosity, this openness, this humility, not only as scientists or people that talk about consciousness, but just being a human being, right? And what it means to live a fulfilled life, and this pro-social aspect that you talk about, which a lot of people tend to emulate after a meditation experience, outer body, near death experience. They tend to show more of these pro-social characteristics, and I don't think anyone can deny this it would be something helpful for the world. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that openness is also associated with empathy and appreciation of others, and perhaps sort of full circle, recognizing the possibility that we're all sort of looking through the same eyes, but with a different lens, and connecting to that universal connection that we all sometimes can find.
Beautiful. Same window, maybe different wind of consciousness, as
Yeah,
you would say. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Many metaphors there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we're different, same win, different windows.
Okay, okay, all right. I was curious, like maybe I flipped it as I said that.
Yeah, I think you flipped it, yeah.
All
But
right.
no,
Well,
go
thank
that
you.
way. Try that
Well,
too. Let's
right,
not
right.
let's
That's an
not lock
option
anything
too.
in,
That's an
right?
option too. Speaking of
Yeah,
openness.
right, exactly. Yeah.
But thank you everyone for listening. If this episode with Jonathan has resonated with you, please feel free to share this with a friend, a family member, or a colleague. And please check out Jonathan's links down below. I will have it to his website. And that's all for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And we will see you in the next episode.